rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
All right, just conversation number 26. I'm here with Josiah Neely. I think you guys know who we are, so no big introductions. It's just gonna be us, no guests today. I guess actually, like right before we went on, we were having a conversation, and Josiah was like, "Just do it live, but it was like a lot less vulgar than was it O'Neill? What's it? O'Reilly? The O'Reilly factor.
O'Reilly, yes.
Famous scene, just do it live.
I do, and let me say, I'm not the hugest fan of profanity, but people always share that scene, to like mock O'Reilly or whatever. But honestly, I feel for him in that segment, because he's just like he's trying to get something done and it's not working, and so he's like, all right, look, let's just do it. Let's just do it live, and he does it great, right? He does it great.
But at the end, he's like, after they cut, he's like still super pissed.
That's right. Yeah. But, as someone who's got some anger issues, I can identify with that as well, I guess. But
yeah. Same here. I guess the first thing we want to talk about, as you said, Panera Bread. Actually, why don't you do the rundown? Because I've gone in and out of this discussion, and I have some opinions, but it's like an online thing, and so you need to get the full context, so.
Okay, yeah, and it's hard because with these internet controversies, there are thousands of tweets, right? There's thousands of tweets, and so whenever you try and wade into it, and if you try to drill down and be precise, and be like, well, I don't think this person was saying that. People were like, well, you didn't read these other tweets, and so I don't know. I think the way that it started was, so some random guy was tweeting about how, a lot of economic indicators looked okay, but so just some guy on Twitter was tweeting about how, hey, a lot of economic indicators seem like they're okay, but it feels like the economy kind of sucks. I don't know what's going on. And Chris Rufo, of the Manhattan Institute, replied, and he said, well, I saw in my area that there was a posting for a $70K salary position to be an assistant manager at a Panera Bread, and maybe $100K to be the manager at a Chipotle. Might have had those reversed, but something like that. So a lot of people got really upset and mad that Chris was minimizing the economic plight of people. And also, this, as often happens on social media, the conversation veered off in all sorts of different directions, and you had all sorts of different people kind of taking both sides. I mean, it was an intra-right fight. I don't think any left-wingers were involved in this, really. But you have, you have a bunch of people on one side, Rufo, Cernovich, Claire Lehman, other people who were saying basically.
Cernovich was on the get a job side. I didn't know this.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Cernovich is basically on the quit whining, and if you have a problem, there's plenty of work is dignified. So I think there's kind of two schools of thought on this. One is, hey, look, work is dignified, job's a job, you got to hustle, you shouldn't complain, blah, 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 blah. And then the other side is basically this is insulting, it's demeaning, people deserve better than this. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's there's a lot of elements, right? There's a lot of elements, and I think it's not always easy. It's not always easy to even understand what people are arguing because, of course, like, I mean, somebody's got to be the manager at Panera Bread, right? I mean, I do know people who are like, "Oh, Panera Bread shouldn't exist," so there you go, okay? But which is, it's its own sub train, but like, there are a lot of people out there who are going to work like.
Hey, wait, Panera Bread or Panda Express?
I thought it was Panera Bread. Maybe it's a Panda
Or
Express.
Chipotle. But yeah, Panda Express. Yeah. Anyway,
Well, it's the same sort of thing, It's the same sort of thing, like fast, casual, and I mean, it's kind of like they're representative of like a broader class of jobs that are kind of like they're
service
not
economy.
jobs like
The service economy jobs that we have now.
they're service economy jobs, and like aside from whatever the pay is, they're not high status jobs, right? They're not glamorous jobs. They're not, I mean, like an element that comes into a lot of this, I think, also has to do with like the dating market or whatever. So they're not jobs that you like impress people with by saying it's like, hey, I manage a Panda Express or Panera Bread or whatever. And but a lot of jobs are like that, a lot of jobs have always been like that. I don't know, maybe if you were like working on an assembly line in a bottling plant or something, right? Was that impressive to women? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's been a tough thing to kind of get a handle on. I think like the big question is just basically, are modern times, like the current environment, is it like especially bad in the job market for young people or young talented people or young white men, I don't, depending on how exactly you want to slice it or divide it. And the two sides are basically, one side says, yeah, things are, especially bad. You shouldn't like minimize it. And it's kind of like insulting, to tell people that they should just, suck it up and take, these sorts of jobs. And then the other side is basically, hey, look, life has never been a bed of roses. Things are actually not really any worse now than in the past. And, complaining isn't going to get you anywhere. So you just need to like nose to the grindstone, blah, 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 blah. So that's, I think, kind of the 30,000 foot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I saw. I didn't keep track of the whole thing. There's a couple of things I want to just like point out. So I'm going in and out of the debate, and a lot of the talking points, they're quite familiar, and the same kind of talking points that you might have between some DSA type person and Matt Iglesias. So there is the same conversation on the center to the left, but in that case, it's usually like the far left, the Democratic Socialists, or the populists who are saying people can't people can't get by today, and usually it's people like Matt Iglesias who's like, well, the Biden economy, actually, the unemployment's, they'll just like point out these macroeconomic indicators and stuff like that. It's a very, very similar discussion, in my opinion. A lot of it is like vibes versus let's look at the data.
Yeah, so that is an element of it. I sort of think, in a way, from a left wing perspective, the DSA people have a more coherent argument in that when DSA people are like arguing with Matt Iglesias or whoever, they're not saying even implicitly that nobody should be working, but should be forced to work at Chipotle or be a janitor or anything like that, right? I mean, their view is like I'm sure their view would be, well, you just need like whether it's unions or government provision or other stuff, right? It's like people are going to have a bunch of jobs that will be unglamorous and won't be paid very much by the market, and so you need socialism in order to fix that, right? Whereas um I don't like that. Doesn't seem to, like, if you're a right winger, that's not what you're saying. So there's an issue there, because like you are stuck with like, are we just talking about the elite or the would-be elite, or are we talking about everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, some people, like, people are gonna have, like, you could, and while it's possible in theory to be like, so there's a Catholic thinker, writer, G.K. Chesterton, and he wrote a bunch of stuff about like distributism or distributivism or whatever. It was basically just like most people should be subsistence farmers, and then you should have like small shops, and that's like, so you like occasionally you meet people who are kind of like into that sort of romantic vision of society, right? So okay, if that's your vision of society, and you think being a farmer is glamorous, then okay. But like, for the most part, if you're going to have like a modern economy, someone is going to have to make the Starbucks coffee, right? Someone is going to have to you know be cleaning the toilets. Someone is going to have to be you know working in call center, all this stuff. And like, I think that's just like a hard reality. Most people are going to be in those sorts of jobs. And so I think implicitly there's an idea that the people who there are people who deserve better, and they're stuck in this, right? Like, so there's some people who should be like hired by a tech company, or some other high prestige type of thing, and that's not happening to them. And when they complain about it, they're told, oh, we'll just go work at KFC or whatever, right? And that, I mean, I don't know, like, I've never heard anybody say it that way, but if you're trying to make it into a coherent case, it's if you're like a right winger, it seems like that's kind of got to be what you're saying, because otherwise it just doesn't make any sense. One thing, and I think my views on this have kind of evolved over time. And 10 years ago, I used to be, I think, a lot more sympathetic to this idea that young people were facing some like uniquely bad challenges, right? Because after the Great Recession, there was a period where like that was not a great time to be entering the job market, and so a lot of people, I think, were kind of behind. But now, I mean, if you look at graphs, our mutual friend Cremieux, he had some like charts that were showing like where people were financially in each generation at a given age, so like 30 boomers when they were 30 versus Gen X when they were 30 versus millennials when they were 30, and Zoomers when they're 30, which I guess some of them now are. And like each generation is doing better than the last.
Millennials are not Zoomers, but
well, okay, whatever. I don't know what the cutoff would be for a Zoomer, but like 25,
yeah.
And each generation is doing like better, is doing better financially than the last at the same point in their life cycle, which I think is, that's what you want, right? But it doesn't suggest that things are uniquely bad now. Now there are, I would say, there's some ways in which the current environment is pretty challenging, right? Like, so housing, like housing prices are a lot higher, so that's a problem for young people if they're trying to, be able to afford a place to live in a good area. College is much more expensive, so people have much bigger like student debt burdens than they would, certainly that I did, or even that certainly my dad's generation or whatever would have had. And there does seem to be like something screwed up in the like with dating and like the dating market or whatever, which may or may not be related to economic things, So I guess I don't, I'm not totally unsympathetic. However, I do think that to some extent, it seems like people have unrealistic expectations. And it's kind of always been the case that like, a lot of people have unglamorous jobs, and B, especially when you're young, like when you're in your 20s, like just a lot of people, are working crappy jobs, and it's hard for them to struggle and break in, and some people manage to do it and some people never do it. And, some of the people who never do it think that they deserve better, but like, so that none of that I don't think is new. And to me, like some of the stuff that people are saying, like, $100,000 a year, that's not a good salary or whatever. It comes off as being like, unrealistic and even like a little bit entitled in terms of like, did you think that Friends was actually a realistic portrayal of what life was like in New York in the 90s, where like someone who works in a coffee shop could afford a nice apartment, like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on. One thing we have to say is the proportion of people who are getting college degrees is going way up. And this is a problem in a lot of countries in the developing nations. College educated people actually have higher unemployment than non-college people in some of these countries, like in China, for a while, because they're not going to work certain jobs. They went to college, they're going to work in a factory. In the U.S., that's not the case. Like from what I have seen, every single increment still of education results in lower unemployment, and I think part of that is just like higher human capital, in terms of just like higher, skill and intelligence and whatever at each stage. But there is a problem with people going to college. I mean, so, the credentialism system in this country, the way it's been promoted of getting a degree, is a little screwy insofar as people don't usually say, go get a degree, especially get a degree at a selective university where you can develop a good professional network when you're an undergraduate and get a good internship, but then you get like that good job at McKinsey or whatever. They don't say it might be a little bit harder if you go to I don't know, like I'm just gonna make something up, like Northeast Texas State. Not to like denigrate getting a degree at Northeast Texas State, and also like a lot of the people who go to like those places, like some of them like, oh, I should have gone somewhere else, and then they go to graduate school, whatever. So I'm not making this like a one size fits all, but there's a gradation, and a college degree is not just a college degree. Getting a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan is different than getting a bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State. I don't know. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that because it's a real university, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Whatever. And so I think some of the complaints that people have are the fact that the returns to the value on some degrees is very low. Sometimes they're negative insofar as like there are majors where people seem to be making way less. They go and study something for 4 years and then they go work at Starbucks, which again, like that's like, oh, it's a bad job, but like you don't need a college degree to work at Starbucks. And so I think there's some of that going on. On the internet, you get stories of, well, I have a computer science degree. Usually they don't tell you where. So I don't know if it's from Carnegie Mellon or
Right.
I don't know what your grades are. Also, you're an individual. There are people who have like great on paper credentials, and then you interview them. You're like, no.
Right. Yes.
And so it's like there are all these things where it's like I don't know if this example is gonna pan out when you dig. And a lot of times when the media would report on somebody, so for example, I'll give you a concrete example. After the .com bubble burst, there was an issue with unemployment with software developers and how it was going to be like, no one's going to be able to be a software developer because like there's no too many people and they're going to hire like only 18-year-olds. I don't know, whatever. And they talked to a software developer who was in a shelter in the Bay Area, a homeless shelter. And it was like, oh my God, there are like engineers who are now like homeless. And then like the news did, the newspaper, the media did some digging on his background and like talked to his coworkers. Like this was just a very difficult guy to work with.
Right.
And he had a good job because he had skills and they needed engineers, but that was like the tightest engineering market ever.
Yeah.
This was actually I'm not saying he obviously was hireable, but this was a engineer that you would hire definitely later on, just because of his difficult personality. Well, that contextualized why he found himself without a job, without any money. There were just a lot of things about this guy that existed as part of his character beyond software engineer, which is the only thing that's in the headline. And so I think the stories, some of that is happening. I also have to say, kind of annoys me, but it's a little ridiculous for people on the internet to go at Chris Rufo. I just have to say this, it's like, first of all, Chris is just like mouthing like, much not more nicely than like the libertarian talking points that you would hear like 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Like these are just like pre-made talking points on the right, and he's just recycling them. But he's saying them in a very nice way, actually. It used to be way harsher. It used to be like, get a job and stop complaining and getting on welfare, whatever. That's how they used to say it. But they're like attacking Chris Rufo, like, who are you? Well, I mean, like, Rufo himself was very, very like lived a bohemian life. He was a journeyman filmmaker and stuff, and he's really turned it around. Well, I don't know if you would say it that way, but he might say this is like the culmination of his life's work in terms of like he developed these skills and stuff. He didn't have much money in his 20s, even though he's from like his parents are lawyers. And in his 30s, he was still trying to figure things out until about like 4 years ago. I remember he messaged me in the spring of 2020, just like we're just asking just like random things because like he saw me in City Journal where he got some fellowship in Manhattan. Anyway, that was 4 years ago. He's transformed our political culture in a lot of ways. He's made such a big difference. And then there's these people who are just like BAP said, like, oh, like Rufo couldn't like do what like an anon on. And I'm just like, okay, this is just ridiculous discussion. This is like totally unconnected to reality. Like whatever you think of Chris Rufo, the fact that you're saying something like that indicates that like I have a hard time taking you seriously as an analytical person. You just want to say shit on the internet,
Yeah. That BAP. I mean, the BAP tweet. I thought. I think it was something about like basically suggesting that Rufo and these other people were taking the view that they did because they were like parroting the views of their like paymaster billionaires who want poor working conditions and pay for people or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, it was like Claire Lehman, Hanania. There's like somebody else I don't remember, but Philippe Lemoyne. But like actually, like these are people. You like them or dislike them. They have like a track record of like bootstrapping and succeeding as commentators in a way that all these other people. I mean, like BAP at least supports himself, but like all these other people are just like the internet complaining.
Yes.
So it's just like, why are you? I mean, that just doesn't make sense.
It was an odd. I mean, I don't want to obsess too much about one tweet, but it was an odd list because it seemed like it was almost like going out of the way to pick people for whom the like toadying the party line type of thing just doesn't fit. Like like if you spend any time with him or whatever, like the idea that he is even capable of parroting something in order, parroting a certain opinion in order for money, it's just not plausible. Like he wouldn't be able to do it. He would just like explode and then start. No,
Philippe Lemoyne is the type of guy who's just like, okay, this is why you're wrong. Let me tell you why you're wrong. And he's going to go on for like an hour and you're like, drop it. You know, I mean, it's like this is not. He's not like that's what he would tell his like. You know, I mean, even Hanani, who like you know, I'm friendly with Richard, but like, you know, maybe he's the closest of like he does a little engagement farming, obviously. But you know, it's just like there's a certain type of person that I think like BAP had in mind or like that would fit. And this is like frankly an obscure person who works at I'm just gonna say American Enterprise or Heritage or Brookings or whatever. And like they say certain things and they have certain donors and they've been saying the same thing for 25 years and it's a living, you know? But
Yes.
they're not people like this. They're not like the people who were mentioned. There are people who are the whole idea, I think part of this discourse seems to be that okay, there are certain people who are self starters, but not everyone's like that. But other people also deserve a shot at prestige, I guess, if they're not self starters, which is like, oh, okay, you know?
I don't know. Yeah. I think BAP doesn't he think that like 80% of people shouldn't breed because they're like genetically unfit or something?
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit odd for him to be like sticking up for.
Yeah, and I don't like the term like so like there's a term called woke right. I don't really know what it means. I don't really like the term.
Yeah.
But like some of the reactions were similar to kind of like the woke stuff insofar it was like you know, they were like taking offense at like, oh, like you don't understand how hard it is to be a white man in America, young white man in America today.
Right.
And it was structurally, it was the same as the kind of like stuff about like systemic racism. You know, it was just structurally this. It was the same argument. So I was like,
It is, and you've even gotten like weird things of like people reaching out and being like, "Hey, you know, this is a bad look," you know, like basically equivalent of like read the room type of stuff from people who like ordinarily would be like, you know, like F the room, right? So yeah, it is odd. I wonder if some of it has to do with like I mean, I don't know. I don't want to psychoanalyze people, but Trump is about to become president again, and maybe there's some like status anxiety of people that they're like being, you know, even though in their minds they're the right wing anons are like the key to Trump's success, right? That the attention is not on them now; it's on the like Mark Andreessen, Elon type of people, and they're being kind of shunted aside. I don't know. I mean, that thought has occurred to me, but obviously there's like a huge number of currents here.
well, so you're saying this is a follow up to the H1B.
Correct. Yes.
There is like a little bit of some correlation, I think, with some of that. Not total, but there is some correlation with the H1B, and it's just like, you know, so yeah, not total because like this was not really like, I mean, I'm sure Elon would agree more with Rufo, but like, you know, that crowd kind of just sat it out.
Yes, he has. So the like opponents are different, right? In that the first set of but I mean it's like basically the like anons. The first round was the anons versus Elon and Vivek and those guys, and the second round is the anons versus Rufo and you know, that sort of thing. And I mean, what's the commonality is like both like the Trump administration is going to listen to Rufo. The Trump administration is going to listen to Elon. They have like places at the table, influence in policy. Is the Trump administration going to listen to the anons? You know, do they actually have influence? I don't know. I mean, maybe I think maybe there's some like aggravation about that, but like I say, like that's just a thought that I've had. I don't want to lean too heavily on it because you know, people are who they are. People are psychologically mysterious. You know, I don't even understand why I do some of the things myself sometimes. So trying to figure it out for somebody else.
Yeah, and like let's go back to like in terms of Braxton's like aside from the vibes. So I mean, like part of the issue is actually like if you look, I mean, so like the average house in SF, I just like looked it up. It's like it's like sells for like $1 million. The average house in Chicago sells for like 380,000 or something like that, right? Like look it up. But the point is, there are parts of the country that are affordable, that have jobs actually. Like South Dakota, for example, has like jobs. And but like a lot of the discussion are people that want to live, I think, in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York City in particular.
Sure.
Austin wouldn't even rate on that, And there's a disjunction between the number of people who want to live there and the jobs available. A lot of it has to do with housing, and we haven't talked that much about housing policy, but like the housing stuff is like really simple in this country, where we live in Austin, Texas, and there's just a lot of building, and so the housing inflation got under control. Like it's changed a lot actually, even at the time that I've lived here, which is 8.5 years, almost 9 years now. It's gone from like crazy affordable compared to California to like moderately affordable compared to California.
Right.
What happened is like, if you look at the housing costs, they just like kind of plateaued in Austin because there was just a lot of building. So the median price right now is like 585,000. Which like that's way higher than it was like a decade ago. But that's because Austin has grown a lot, and in response to the growth, people have built a lot of housing. And this is just like, quote, supply and demand, So I'm looking at it, and it says, like the housing, they were like, I don't know if so it like beat inflation for a while. So right before it jumped up, and then it peaked in May 20, it was 681,000 on May 2022, and now it's like 590, 580. And that's like going up from like, say, like 350 in like 2019 or something. So it jumped up, and then it's like crashed back down. And this is like supply and demand. But some of these like places on the coast, they don't allow. I mean, this is not like a housing whatever. It's like we're not going to go into detail. I think like people understand the issue, Right. But there's a simple problem. You build a lot of housing that would allow $100,000 to be, because it is. I'm not gonna lie. Like I don't know how people survive on $100,000 in San Francisco, although they do. But those are people who are not on the internet wanting prestigious jobs, I guess. That's also true. So it's like, if you guys look, New York City has about the same average income as Austin, Texas for people, but we're obviously way cheaper living here, so it's much more sustainable. But the issue with New York is like there's like vast swaths of immigrants that are not part of the social world that like you don't hear from. They're happy to live in crowded conditions, splitting these salaries and whatever. And that's just always been the way it is in these big urban areas. Kind of an underclass, right? The problem is when you have native-born Americans and like, they're just like, well, I can't live like this, which is true, in terms of expectations. Well, how do you fix that? We do have a simple policy fix in this country, and that is to build housing. That has been shown to work in certain parts of the country. It has been shown to work in other countries. We just have like a political economy where, let's just call it like a lot of it's boomers. They don't want there to be building, and they're just like they're set in their ways. In California, they use environmental regulations, etc. And that's just what it is. I think that would solve half the complaints.
Yes. And I just looking at some data yesterday, it does appear that housing construction in the U.S. really never recovered after 2008, and so that like it seems like the housing market recovered because prices came back, but that's because supply, part of that is because new supply is just much lower in most parts of the country. And so, I think that housing, if we could, build a lot more, I do think it would alleviate, I don't think it would totally solve the problems, but I think it would alleviate a lot of problems. It would probably also have some downstream effects in terms of, like dating and other stuff, right? But
well, I mean, one thing is, for example, if you have a remote job, and like sometimes companies not sometimes companies do try to take into account whether you're remote or where you live in terms of your salary and things. In terms of your raises, they're not gonna, they probably won't like take you down a peg, but they'll probably like do a review. They're like, look, you're getting paid a lot for where you live. we're not going to give you a raise this year until like you come closer to, you know. But anyway, you could do that, but then you would have to live. Like, let's say you had, you know, let's say you had a job at a think tank, in New York City. Yeah, well, you do it. Yours is in DC, right?
The think tank is, but
Yeah. So you have a remote job. Like maybe your salary is pegged to New York City, but you can live in Des Moines. Just like give you an example, Iowa, which is Des Moines is like not a tiny city, but it's not like glamorous. Let's see what's his pop. I just want to check his population. Des Moines population is 210,000. Okay, 210,000 is like big enough that you'll have like, you know, like chain restaurants if you want, like nice like little restaurants, like you'll have bookstores, you'll have like everything, right? It's not a small town, but I mean, we live in Austin. It's not like New York City or LA or SF, but like there's people that come through, whatever. It's, you know, it's cool. It's not that cool. So you're gonna have to trade off, or you build more housing. You know, there's just like things that we can do to solve some of these problems that people just don't want to do. I don't really know. I mean, we want to do it, you know, but a lot of people, brass tacks, they just don't want to do it. They don't want development in their neighborhood. They don't want to change the character of their community. And we have more people in this country. We could, like, you know, do an immigration pause, for example, which like a lot of people in the Trump administration want to do, or like, you know, there are people like conservative media who want that. One thing that the immigration pause is going to do, which immigration restrictionists like Mark Krikorian have been admitting, for example, for decades, certain things are going to get more expensive, you know? And so like labor is going to get much more expensive. And I think a lot of people are going to complain about that, actually.
Right.
Who are also in favor of immigration restriction because they don't want their community changed, you know?
Right.
But like, this is just like this very close to like Newtonian mechanics. Like you just like cut off the labor supply and then boom, like people are just going to bid it up. And I don't really know how people are going to deal with that. Right.
Yeah. So there's a couple of disconnected points that I want to make sure that I make while we're on the topic. One is, so I do think that there is an element here in terms of like whether you want to call it DEI or affirmative action, or to some extent, like this even came in like the immigration H-1B thing where there's a feeling on, you know, among some people, if you're like a young white man, there's a feeling that you can't get like a fair competition for these jobs. Like if you're having trouble breaking in, and then you also see, you know, people who are being promoted for reasons of race or gender or whatever, I think that kind of rankles. And, you know, one of the negative impacts of this is that like the resentment can go far beyond the actual job impact. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have an open position and there are like 19 white men who apply and there's one black woman, right? And they hire the black woman. Okay. Now, all 19 of those white guys potentially could think, oh, well, I lost the job because they wanted to hire the black woman, right? At most, only one of those guys could get the job, you know? But like potentially all the actual effect 19 times is the like resentment effect, or what, you know, whatever you want to, how you want to label that. So, I mean, that I think is a big problem. And it is, I would say, an unfairness that, you know, hopefully there will be like changes. We'll move back to like more merit-based stuff or whatever. But I'm sure that like that plays a role in some of it, you know, in terms of like rankling. The other thing I will say, you know, when you're young, like especially when you're a young man, like you want to go out and conquer the world, right? Usually, right? And as you grow up, you know, sometimes you do that. Sometimes you conquer just like part of Asia or whatever. But for most people, there comes a point where you kind of like have to accept, okay, this is all it's going to be, you know, like I'm not going to be launching rockets to Mars, you know, And I think that's part of the maturation process is coming to accept that and realizing that it's not necessarily so bad, like having like I understand that like if you're 24 or whatever, and someone is saying, oh, accept a good job that's not totally glamorous, right? Maybe you think that you can do better, and by all means, you should try your best and like try and go for that. But you should also like, there's a piece that comes, I think, from like realizing, that even if you're not going to conquer the world, there are other things that you can do that are important for you, like as a man in terms of family and work and all that sort of stuff. And I know people. I have a friend, and a good friend from college, who was like a philosophy. He went to like get a PhD in philosophy at like an elite university, and at some point he like gave up on that, and now I think he like manages a call center or something in like a medium sized city. And what he said is like, obviously that was very hard at the time, but now he says, look, I'm much happier now than when I was doing that. I'm making a lot more money, I've got like family, other stuff, and so like it's not like his life is not a disaster. Like that's not like, if someone ends up like if you end up manager at a Panera Bread, like your life is not a disaster, right? I guess that's what I would say. Obviously if you want to aim higher, by all means go for it, but I don't agree that is a like a wasted or undignified like way to end up in your life.
Yeah. One thing I would say is like, there's no dignity supposedly in some of these jobs, but one thing that is good about these jobs, yeah, a lot of times you're on your feet, but they're not like the old manufacturing jobs, like kind of destroyed people's bodies,
Yeah.
So they're like 65 years old and they're hunched over, and I think we remember some of these people. I think it was more common when we were younger because more people were in these like really like labor intensive manufacturing type jobs. No, we're not talking about like, I'm not talking about a roofer, like that makes sense. Like, okay,
Yeah.
like just whatever. I'm talking about like just even in the factories, like these repetitive motions and injuries, and
Yeah.
a job at like a Panera or Panda Express, like if you're managing, you're doing things. Like, I'm not saying it's there's no physical activity, but it's just like it's a much lower impact on your body, and so maybe you'll have like less glory, like just like let's say that you were making a car, and like that's what you did for like 30 years.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of like, yeah, that is kind of like something to be proud of. Like you made a car, I don't know why, but it feels like a big deal. Whereas like you're at Panera and you're directing like sandwiches very efficiently,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like that's not something you can like brag about in the same way, I feel, but you'll be much healthier and you'd be there for your grandkids in a much like more like obvious and impactful way, just because the job is just like so much less hard on your body. And I think people need to just think about that. Like it's not all there's not all just downsides to it. Like even aside, there's some upsides to some of the new jobs in the service economy. They might not be glorious, but like people don't get killed, they don't get injured, et cetera, et cetera. So that is like something to think about. I mean, I think like what's like going back to elite overproduction, I really think it's like a who, like who are we talking about here? Like I'm 99% sure like Rufo was not talking about people that were aspiring to be think tankers,
Right.
When he's saying like go work at Panda Express, like he's just like, I think he was just thinking more like the average person who, to be candid though, is not like going to be tweeting on Twitter all the time. So I think that was not, I don't think it was like misreading the room. I don't think that's what I would call it really functionally. I think Rufo like misjudged the audience of who was going to read his tweet, because the people that he's talking about that would be happy to work for $75,000 a year at that age at Panda Express are not on Twitter. They're on probably Instagram or something else, or like they're gaming. They're playing their World of Warcraft, whatever.
Right.
They're not reading the tweets. The people who are reading the tweets are the subset of individuals, a very small subset, who actually like do think somehow it would be awesome to be a fellow at the Discovery Institute like Rufo was like 10 years ago,
Right.
and talking about like urban affairs and whatever. So, I mean, I think that was like a little bit of a misread. I wouldn't say it's not reading the room. Because I think it's like pretty obvious who actually Rufo was talking about. So I think this is a situation where Rufo misjudged his audience, but his audience was a bit obtuse.
Yes, right,
Because like people are just like, well, obviously, like he's talking. He's like, no, I'm 99% sure Rufo's not talking about you. You know?
right, right.
I mean,
And it's not like, I mean, Rufo himself was not. I mean, it's possible to lateral into think tank life. You know, he was doing like films or something.
yeah, he was doing films.
I know
Yeah.
a guy who was like doing some think tank stuff, and then for a while he was like a personal trainer at like a health club or something, and then he lateraled back into think tank. You know, so I don't know. I mean, maybe maybe it's harder in some ways than if you have like the perfect resume or whatever. But I feel like
Well, here I'm going to give some advice here.
talent are still, you know,
Yeah. Like, there are certain jobs, like if you're a doctor, or to some extent if you're a lawyer, there are certain jobs, professional type jobs, where you have to just like kind of be on the conveyor belt of credentials and certifications in a particular path. And there's other jobs that are not like that. Like I work in the tech sectors,
Okay.
let's just tech adjacent. That's a much more choose your own adventure, build your own, or like there's much more like erratic paths. I think like think tanks are also, even though they're a little stodgy, I think they're actually like a little bit more open to flexibility and career path and the type of person that they will take on. And obviously, if you're like a hospital, major hospital, whatever. Okay, so there's different types of professional tracks, and like in the track of like say in tech or in some of these other things or in think tanks, a lot of it actually does have to do with the network that you build and the social relationships you have, not the credentials that you have. And so people will. A lot of it is, like, and this is like goes with dating too. A lot of it's like a search and discovery, and the matching problem. And so if you can resolve the matching problem by developing a network, and a lot of that just comes with time. When you're young, it's really difficult. I remember that nobody knows who you are, nobody cares who you are, and they all have like pre-existent social networks that you haven't broken into. And so a lot of times what happens is there's a job advertisement and someone from the network fills it. That was always what was expected. 1 out of 10 times it doesn't work, and the newbie fills it, and that's how the network like grows, and like replaces itself. And so one thing that I would recommend to people is stop focusing on the fact that like you went to an R1 university or whatever and got these grades and have this skill, because people don't know who you are.
right.
Especially if you're an ant on the internet, no one knows who you are. I mean, that's just a weird example. But my point is like a lot of things that people complain about, they're more about soft skills and social skills than they're about like the explicit hard skills that are like visible on a resume. And that's why a lot of times you have a good resume and like you don't get a callback, because I mean they were going to hire the person in their network,
Right.
even
Yes.
if they weren't explicit, and that's just like some advice that I think is important. And as you get older, you will develop it. But some people are just very, they're just like very antisocial, and they never develop it. And like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you, because like I know it's very difficult. And you don't want to do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of life is attitude, I guess. I wanted to say just a little bit about David Lynch.
All right, let's do this before the paywall.
Okay. All right. And I don't know that this is going to be a huge.
Yeah, it's more Gen X thing.
Yeah, it's a Gen X thing, and it's not. It's more nostalgia or whatever. But okay. So David Lynch died, and I just really like he's just a really unique artistic force in American life in the late 20th century and early 21st century, in my view. I was a big fan. I love Twin Peaks. I loved, I've seen like most of his movies, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, um, The Straight Story, which is like a rated G picture, about a guy on like a riding lawnmower, going cross country, and his stuff like was pretty weird, it like had like a weird mix of like like someone once described David Lynch as Jimmy Stewart from Mars, right? Because he had a kind of like hokey all shucks kind of attitude, but then also like his stuff involved like a lot of weird and often disturbing content and themes and like supernatural stuff and whatever. So I'm just, I'm like, everybody's got to go. So, but I just wanted to say that I am like a David Lynch respecter, and I'm sad to see him gone. I don't know if you have like strong thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like much to say. I would say like I was thinking, was it Blue Velvet? Blue Velvet. Uh, I was like, I just mentioned this on the internet. The girl I dated in college was a big fan. And I think we watched that like 12 times, and to the point where like I think I started having dreams about the movie, which is like there's dream-like aspects to the movie, so it was kind of like a really nested, ironic thing. I get why he's influential, and
You didn't ever pull out the nitrous, did you?
no,
You don't know what I'm talking about? Do you remember what I'm talking about
I
there?
don't remember that part now.
Okay.
Was
All
it?
right. Well, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Like a lot of those 12 times, like I wasn't totally paying attention. But like I was 20 years old. Okay, so anyway, yeah, like he's done all sorts of movies. So I think like yeah, he was one of those. I would say he's one of those directors in our generation, people of a certain like socioeconomic background, a little bit like not like total bohemians, but kind of like are interested in the arts or hang around with people that are into culture, and it's like you got to watch his movies. You got to watch like didn't he direct Twin Peaks? He directed Twin Peaks, right?
He did. Yes.
Yeah, and so the term is not wonder, but like just there's like a lot of like befuddled surprise,
Uh-huh.
in his films, which is like so if you go to like Star Wars or something like that, it's like there's gonna be explosions, a really stupid, I mean, candidly, like really stupid plot, but whatever, you know what you're gonna get. With David Lynch film, it's just kind of like afterwards you're like, it was like, and that's what you knew you were gonna get, which is that's just like a different thing. So I think it was definitely like an alternative, to like kind of like the blockbuster tentpole, and he like filled that niche. I mean, there's others that are like somewhat different too. I mean, Kubrick films were not like obviously the same. But I mean, they're a filmmaker. Like, it's like in the 1970s, there was like the auteur movement in film where it was like the director was given a lot of, and like, I think like Michael Cimino with like some of his like failures, like ended that, like Heaven's Gate or something, like Ishtar as well. That wasn't Cimino, I think, but anyway, the point here is like there's a little bit of that, I think, in people like Lynch or Kubrick, like certain directors. I mean, I would say like maybe the closest today is like maybe like Michael Nolan type person. There's still some director. What?
Christopher Nolan.
Christopher Nolan, whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever.
Right.
I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? There's certain directors where you're just like, oh, I'm gonna watch that director because like he's just so good, or his like imprint is just clear on the movie. And that's what David Lynch was. Where like, whether you thought the movie was good or bad, like let's say The Dude in 1984, like there's mixed feelings about that. Some positive, some negative.
Right.
But and Lynch kind of disowned it, but it was definitely like a David Lynch film. It was definitely like Dune. What if David Lynch directed Dune? Well, he did.
He did. That's right. Yes.
So like, I think
Return of the Jedi, which would have been interesting if he had managed to do that. But
yeah, it would have been. Yeah, it would have had a stamp. So I think what we're with Lynch's passing, like we are seeing the kind of like the end of, because like he's older than us, obviously.
right.
People that came of age in like that auteur phase of the 70s are now like dying. So like, who's going to replace them? And like like I said, I'm not like a film buff or anything, but like younger directors like J.J. Abrams or something like that. I don't think that they have the same. I don't know. They have their thing, but like it's not the same. They don't have the same stamp.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think, and I'm not hugely into contemporary film, but and he's a very different type of person. But like, was it Eggers who did The Northman and Nosferatu or whatever? I think he fills like maybe a similar sort of role in that he makes like movies that are kind of weird, and also he has just like a very clear, distinct vision, where like you it's like obvious that it's his sort of film, as opposed to like a lot of directors or whatever that can be like, well, now I'm gonna make like Guardians of the Galaxy 4 or whatever, and you could just like bounce around, do all sorts of stuff, and they're, I won't say interchangeable, but they don't have like a kind of distinct feel to them the way that Lynch did, or maybe Eggers does, or some of these other.
Yeah, well, I just don't. They're not given the same freedom that they originally were.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just like it's kind of a legacy of a period when they were indulged and they're not anymore.
Yeah.
So, I think we're seeing it, with the internet and with like our generative AI and all these other things. There will be different types of medium where creativity will emerge. It's just that in film right now, where we are is all the oxygen is just like sucked up by sequels and kind of like comic book movies and these sorts of things, and those are the money makers.
Yeah.
And there are obviously small independent films, but I think there's been a great hollowing out of the middle since 1999. Where it's like you had all those you had all those like great films in 99, but over the last 25 years it's been a great hollowing out of the middle. And I think that's why we don't have like the young David Lynches as much,
Right.
because their uniqueness, their artistic vision is actually going to be in the films that are not big blockbusters, because the big blockbusters, that's already written in terms of what they're going to do.
Right.
You're not going to really impose your vision. Like the director is basically just like a pilot on a plane where it's on autopilot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's going to be someone who writes the script. The script's going to have like the same beats that all the other scripts do. And that they're going to have the same actors, like mix and match them. And then there's going to be like a final scene with like a sky laser or whatever though. It's just like they're all the same, And so with your director, you're just going to be like, how do you execute it? How do you pull it off? It's not your original creative vision that really matters.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
All right, let's talk about inauguration and
Okay. All right. Woohoo!
Yeah. So yeah, I'm actually going to be in DC this weekend, going to some events and stuff like that, and talk to some people. I guess this isn't like as big of a deal, I feel, as like 2016 when it was a shock.
Yes.
I feel like it's a little bit more low key. People aren't shocked by the win, and there's jockeying for positions and all those other things. And like candidly, Joe Biden. Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse, after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of the lyrics or discuss the